This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below.
Hey, what's up? So a couple of rumors have been popping out about the Browns since they lost this game to the Chargers. A lot of people thinking the Browns will be sellers at the trade deadline, and I think that's something we've all known for quite a while here. The question is, how much of a seller will the Cleveland Browns be, and who will be on the market here for the Cleveland Browns, and how much sense does that make going forward given the Browns' current situation? So the names that I've heard the most smoke around: Za'Darius Smith, that looks like it's probably going to happen. Greg Newsome could happen. And surprisingly, David Njoku's name has popped up in trade rumors recently, which does actually surprise me a little bit. There's some things, I'll talk about all of it in just a second here. So let's start with the most obvious one. Za'Darius Smith. I mean, the second they traded Amari Cooper, you knew somebody like Za'Darius Smith was on the block here. The question would be, would there be a market there for Za'Darius Smith? There seems to be a market there with Detroit for Za'Darius Smith. It makes sense. He's a former Pro Bowl edge rusher. They need a edge rusher. So them making a move for Za'Darius will be pertinent. The question is, what's going to be the compensation for it, right? If the Browns can get a third-round pick out of Za'Darius Smith, I would call that a win. I would even call a fourth-round pick out of a Za'Darius Smith trade a win. Now, I think the reason this trade has been taking so long is because they're probably going to work out something with the money there, because Za'Darius' cap hit for this year is pretty small. You're just going to have to pay the vet minimum for him for the rest of the season. His cap number is only like $5 million, but he has another year lopped onto that contract at $9 million with no guaranteed money. So you could cut him. So it could be a 2-year kind of situation with Za'Darius. He would be 33 at that time. And then a void year at $15 million. So they're probably negotiating that void year to bring that money down. And what draft compensation would be fair to do there. But getting Za'Darius for what could be a 1-year rental and a cut after a year, or a 2-year thing, would make a ton of sense for the Detroit Lions, who are in win now mode. So I expect that deal to come through any day now. I really wouldn't be surprised if that deal got announced while I was recording this video. So that is Za'Darius Smith's situation. Greg Newsome's situation is simple. The Browns have a surplus at corner, right? They have more corners than they can play. They have, I think 4 corners that they really like: Martin Emerson, Denzel Ward, Greg Newsome, and Cam Mitchell. And Greg Newsome is going to be the least useful and most expensive corner that they have. They think that Martin's going to be somebody they're going to want to extend. They also think that Cam Mitchell has some potential there to be a third corner, especially a nickel. Greg Newsome is going to be making, $19 million on a 5th-year option. So if they can move him for a draft pick or two to a team that really wants him, I think they would be willing to do that. That would make sense. So the team that's been rumored is Houston. Like, there's been a lot of talks about the Browns trading Greg Newsome to Houston. Forgive me, it is the early morning hours here for me. So that would make a ton of sense as well. The last person that's been in the real trade rumors, right? I know people have been throwing Myles Garrett's name around, but I don't think the Browns have any interest in trading Myles. The last person who's been in the trade rumors is David Njoku. Now, this is a bit of a surprise and a newcomer to this list. On some levels, it makes sense. On some levels, to me, it doesn't make sense, and I don't like it. I'll explain my whole feelings on it. So, David Njoku getting traded. I get it on one level. He's 28. He's not been as productive this year as he was last year. If you're the Browns and you don't think he can replicate the production that he had last year, then it would make sense to move him while he still has a ton of value left out there. Now, I don't think you just move him to move him, right? I don't think you just trade him to anybody willing to take him, but I think you trade him if the price is right. Like if somebody gives you a Godfather deal, they offer you a second round pick in 2025 or something like that, or 2026 or something like that, then that might be something you have to consider. But I don't think the Browns do this unless they really, really feel like there is an amazing deal on the table there for David Njoku. Now, we've talked a lot about like the individual stuff about trading one of these players. One thing I want to get into is the salary cap situation, because the Browns have a couple of looming salary cap things to think about. Now, let's look at the Browns' current salary cap situation here on Over the Cap, which, by the way, is, from what I hear, the best salary cap website. So this is the Browns cap situation. They have $45 million in cap space right now. They're $3 million under, $13 million under in 2026. And then they have pretty much a clean slate in 2027. Now, let's say the Browns do what we expect. They trade Za'Darius Smith. Then that changes the Browns situation from, it eats up some of the Browns cap space this year, right? You eat up some cap space with the dead money this year. So you go down to 32 instead of 41, but you do free up some cap space next year, and the year after, you're no longer in the negative for those 2 years. Now, let's say you find a trade partner for Greg Newsome. All of a sudden, that opens up $19 million in cap space. Now, what you're going to find here is that your cap space in 2024 is going to go down, but it will refill in 2025 and 2026. So that's kind of the sacrifice you're making. It's why the Browns want to enter the season with as much cap space as possible, because it allows them to make moves that will open up things in the future. Now let's go ahead here to David Njoku. Let's say they find a trade for David Njoku, right? And somebody wants to trade for David. Boom, that frees up a ton of money. That's why the Browns are probably willing to do it, right? Before, the Browns would be at $19 million of cap space in 2025. And in 2026, they go from $2 to $26 million of cap space. This is still with Deshaun Watson's contract on the books here, right? There could be like a Dalvin Tomlinson move here. Let's say they trade Dalvin Tomlinson. That frees up some money as well, right? But I also think that they can just cut Dalvin Tomlinson in the offseason if they really wanted to next year. If they can save the same amount, they don't necessarily have to find a trade partner here. So that's just like with those three trades, that's how much that would change your cap situation, right? David Njoku, Za'Darius Smith, Greg Newsome, right? If there was somebody else that got traded, I think it would be Dalvin Tomlinson. That would make a ton of sense. That would be your cap situation here. Another thing to consider when we're talking about these players that the Browns may or may not trade is, do they have an obvious replacement on the roster? With Za'Darius Smith, the obvious replacement is Isaiah McGuire, who's been playing really good football over the last couple of weeks, right? With Dalvin Tomlinson, you can argue that Michael Hall playing more would be good for this team, but then you would probably have to play Quentin Jefferson again, which would not be great for the team. So there's a balance. The Browns have to make sure they're putting their young players like Michael Hall and Isaiah McGuire in a situation where they can still win and develop while also making moves for the future. So that's what makes a Dalvin Tomlinson move a little more shaky. Also, you have to ask yourself, is there really going to be a market in the middle of the season for a defensive tackle? Which is another question that there's not a clear answer to, right? If you trade David Njoku, who's the clear replacement there? Is it Jordan Akins? I don't know. Like, that doesn't, you don't really have a young guy there at tight end that you feel really good about. Greg Newsome, you do have an obvious replacement. The Za'Darius Smiths of the world, the Greg Newsomes of the world, are probably more likely to go than the guys who don't, because again, you still got to replace that player on the roster, and you want to do that at a price that makes sense. All right, so the Myles situation is pretty simple. He has 2 years left on his contract. He's going to get an extension more than likely in the 2025 offseason. I doubt they let him go into the final year of his deal with no guarantees. So you would extend Myles Garrett. It would be a 5-year extension to probably take you to like 2030 or 2029, more than likely 2030. And it would hit the salary cap in 2027, where we established that the Browns are going to have a lot of space open up, right? So there's going to be probably a significant hit in 27, but you could spread it out. And you see how the Browns did it with the void years here, where this extension basically took them from the end of his rookie deal to about 2026, but it had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 void years attached to it. Probably something similar going to happen with the next contract, where it would take you to 2030, but it would have probably void years up to 2035 to be able to spread the cap hits and the bonuses out, right? You see right here, what these void years do is there's 8 million here, 8 million here, 8 million here, 4 million here. That's 30 million, well, $28 million that is not going to be accounted for. Probably way over 28, because I'm not even adding the 400, 400, 400, and the 740 there. So a lot of money that doesn't even account towards what your cap hits are going to be while he's actually playing for your team, which is why teams do the void years. So that is something that's coming up, but it's not that big of a deal. They'll be able to extend Myles and do what they want to, whether they cut Watson or keep Watson on the contract, on the books. 2027, it's basically just a bunch of dudes on void years, right? The only players that are actually under contract in 2027 are Denzel Ward, Jerry Jeudy, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, Dustin Hopkins, Michael Hall, and your draft picks, right? So those are only players we have contracted in 2027. You look at 2026, it's Deshaun Watson, there's Myles Garrett, there's Denzel Ward, there's Jack Conklin. Well, we talk about that in just a second here. Jerry Jeudy, JOK, and then everybody else that I mentioned earlier. So let's continue to play this game, right, with the salary cap. So let's say those are the moves that the Browns do for the rest of the season. They trade David, they trade Dalvin, Za'Darius, and Greg Newsome. I think that would be, if the Browns did that, the quote-unquote clean house, right? That would be them cleaning house. I think the only thing that could be a surprise there is like maybe they go crazy and do like a Denzel Ward trade, but I don't think that Denzel Ward's a player you trade in the middle of the season. You're just not going to get the value you want in the middle of the season for a guy like Denzel Ward, right? So knowing that, this is probably like, if the Browns are the most aggressive in their clean house initiative, this is what it looks like. And it frees up cap space in 2025, 2026. So what do they do with that cap space? Now, let's look at some moves that they'll make going forward. Jack Conklin, what happens if they cut him post June 1st versus pre-June 1st? So they cut him post June 1st. It frees up a decent amount of money. He gets $59 million in cap space. Then next year, and then you jump to $54 million in cap space. If you cut them pre-June 1st, I think you just save some money up front, but it's pretty much the same here. So let's say they cut Jack Conklin with a post-June 1st designation after this year, just to get rid of the contract, and because he's 31, and the team's clearly looking towards a rebuild here, right? So if you cut Jack Conklin, all of a sudden you're at 59, 54, and you're freeing up some space here. Jed Wills, you cut him, boom, you free up some money there. I think you eat some money into 2026. So you might just live with it being on the books, right? Because you don't want to cut into your 2026 money to free up money in 2025, unless you're planning on doing something specific in 2025 that would require you to have that cap space open. The one thing you could do that would be specific to that is, let's say you wanted to cut Deshaun Watson. Now, I don't think that they're going to, I think Deshaun Watson is probably going to be under contract for the entire 2025 season. That's just the hunch that I get from this whole thing. Doesn't mean that he's going to be like who they plan to be the franchise quarterback, but it does mean that he's probably going to be under contract, probably going to be around the building at some point, right? So let's say they cut him, right? If they cut him, The immediate hit is in that first year, right? You see that? In that first year, you cut him. So let's say you cut him. If you cut him post June 1st in 2025, you would drop all the way to $13 million in cap space, but then you would jump up to 73 and then 195 in 2027, where a Myles Garrett extension would likely hit. But you can see here, like, the Browns cap-wise are in a fine position. If they want to keep Deshaun Watson and let that contract just run out, they can do it. They'll have this amount of cap space as long as they make a couple of maneuvers, and it doesn't require them getting rid of Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, right? Another thing we probably have to consider is that there's a chance that Joe Bitonio might retire, right? And let's just imagine that as a post-June 1st cut, because there's no way to actually add in a retirement because there's no standard for retirement. But let's say Joe Bitonio retires, right? That's going to free up some money. So there are going to be things that pop up for this team, right? Guys over 30 that you're probably going to get rid of after a while. Shelby Harris, probably somebody you cut as well. Like, the Browns cap situation, even if they don't do anything with this Watson contract, will be fine. If the Browns felt like they could compete in 2025 with Watson, they could restructure him and then open up over $100 million in cap space in 2025 to kind of spend around him. And it doesn't really hurt your future cap situations either that much, right? You have $100 million in 2025, $54 million in 2026, and then 166. You could just not do that. If you want to cut him in 2025 post June 1st, you could cut him. It would eat into your cap in 2025, but you would be freed up 84 and 195. Now, the Browns are convinced that they can get a franchise quarterback in either the 2025 or 2026 draft, then this makes a lot more sense. This might be the way you want to go. It would make a ton of sense to do this, right? That first year that player's under contract in 2025, you would have not a ton of cap space, but you probably wouldn't even play that young quarterback, and you'd probably try to win with like a bridge quarterback for that year. Or if you draft that quarterback in 2026, you're going to be in a situation where you can spend a lot of money around that quarterback. And then if that quarterback does show some promise, you can go all in that next year in 2027 on a young core around not just the player that you drafted in 2025, but 2026 as well. So if you're planning to move on and you want to kind of build around a younger player, this would make a ton of sense. This wouldn't not make sense either if you just kept Deshaun Watson on the roster and you did 2025 and 2026, because it's not like that's a paltry amount of cap space. You could still bring in a veteran wide receiver or something with that kind of money, and then also be able to keep all the players, the younger players that you want to extend, right? If we look at the Browns free agency list, only player really to worry about in 2025 free agency is Nick Chubb. Other than that, you can let almost all of these guys go, right? You're talking about like Bailey Zapp, Naheem Hines, Ronnie McLeod. You're not really worried about that. In 2026, Greg Newsome would be a free agent, but if you trade him, that's not a problem. Martin Emerson would be a free agent, so that's somebody that you want to have some money freed up for. Maybe Alex Wright is somebody you want to have some money freed up for as well, but he's not going to be too expensive either. Same thing with Martin, unless he has a bounce back year next year. DeJuan Jones will be a free agent in 2027, but by the time we get to 2027, we're talking about the Browns pretty much having a reset no matter what happens at the quarterback position or what happens with Deshaun Watson's contract, right? So that wouldn't be that big of a deal either. So cap-wise, if the Browns make these moves, they'll be in a fine place. There are other ways that they can maneuver it, right? Let's just say they don't trade anybody and they just move on from guys in 2025 that it would make sense to move on from. So Jack Conklin, Shelby Harris, Jordan Hicks. We can go Za'Darius Smith. They just cut him. And then Dalvin Tomlinson. You could free up money and be in the positive just with those simple moves right there. And still keep David Njoku. You could cut David Njoku. That wouldn't make ton of sense, but it would free up some money for 2026 if you're really that pressed about 2026. Greg Newsome would probably just like walk in free agency after this. You could still do a trade for Greg Newsome here to free up some money immediately if that's what you wanted to do, or you could go into the season with a low cap hit. You could do a number of things here, right? So the Browns are in a fine enough position salary cap wise. I anticipate they're going to make one of these two trades here. I think the Za'Darius Smith one is definitely happening. So I think that one's going to happen. I would be surprised if a David Njoku trade happened, but I wouldn't be shocked. And then also the last trade, Greg Newsome. I think that's the right price too, right? The price has to be right for Greg Newsome in order for the Browns to move him. That's kind of an overview of what's going on with the Cleveland Browns, what their salary cap situation is looking like, and why it's not the dire spot that I think some people make it out to be, to kind of twist that wound of the Watson contract, right? Like, it's just the Browns have maneuvered around this contract pretty well, and they have a number of options on how they want to get out of it, if they want to get out of it going forward. So that's my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.